Job chapter 1 verse 6 to chapter 2 verse 10. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house, and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, "The oxen were ploughing, and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them, and took them, and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven, and burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups, and made a raid on the camels, and took them, and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness, and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, and tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell on the ground, and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this Job did not sin, or charge God with wrong. Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this Job did not sin with his lips. What Job experiences here is almost definitely greater than any of us will ever experience. Through evil robbers and murderers, and through divine disasters, Job lost all of his animals, had all of his servants killed except 4, and lost every one of his children. It's easy to read of these horrifying events and not feel their full weight. Often I have read the crucifixion accounts of Jesus and not engaged, Yet whenever I watched The Passion of the Christ, I felt sick to my stomach over what I was watching. So as you read or listen to Job's account, try to depict in your mind's eye how Job would have responded with each successive servant's report of death and destruction. The text opens with a scene in heaven where Satan and God are having a conversation. A question you might be thinking is, how is the devil in God's presence? God cannot look or have fellowship with evil, so how can he allow the devil to be in his presence? Well, God is not having fellowship with the devil in the same way that God has fellowship with his children. This is a business dealing, so to speak. The devil is not enjoying the blessings of God's presence, but he's there to try and undermine God, and Job is used as the battleground for that. Satan explains Job's piety and goodness in terms of the prosperity gospel. Sure, he's faithful, but only because you've given him loads of stuff. If you take that away, he'll curse you directly. And this is the shocking part, that God allows it. And the difficult truth is that God's glory is more important than our comfort. This is something that as Christians we theoretically agree with, but experientially find very difficult to accept and live out. And yet Job did. Job worships God, not for the gifts he gives, but for God's innate glory. God worships God. Job worships God because he is God. He grieves terribly. His agony must have been extreme, like we can't imagine, and yet he did not sin, as he still treated God as the giver of all good things, and perfectly entitled to do whatever he pleases. Yet the devil is not done. He is the accuser, and so continues to accuse Job. The reason he didn't sin is because of his self-centeredness. Job would have let his whole family die if it meant saving his own skin. If you make him suffer in his person, then he'll turn from you. That's what the devil's saying. And shockingly, God allows this as well. There's been one time in my life where I have suffered intensely, and I thought I understood what God was doing through that pain, and so I reasoned that I've understood the lesson and now the lesson can finish. And yet God held me there longer than I thought was necessary. And it was the same with Job. He had everything taken, and then his own self was taken. His sores covered his body. And yet in all of this, Job did not sin. And that's twice that Satan has been wrong about God's people, and God is glorified because of it. God's glory is more important than our comfort. But there is still much more to come, as Job needs to sit with his pain and deal with some less than helpful advice. So 2 questions to think. When we think of Job's narrative, going from having everything to having nothing, there are some strong themes of Jesus' life there. What are those themes? What is it that Jesus gave up, and what are the depths that he went to? Question 2. Satan is seen here accusing and afflicting Job. From passages like 1 Peter 5:8, Ephesians 6:11 and Luke 22:31, we see that Satan is still at work against God's people. How should we as Christians respond to this?